March 1995. A session drummer named Todd Sucherman walked into Chicago Recording Company to cut a new version of a Styx song called Lady. He sat down behind the kit, the tape rolled, and nobody in that room said the name of the man whose drum chair he was sitting in. That man was John Panozzo, co-founder of Styx, the drummer on every album the band had ever made. He wasn't in the studio that day, he wasn't listed in the liner notes, and nobody in the band was talking about why. This is the story of the founding member who never left, and what happened when the band left him. Chapter 1. Three guys from the same block, same neighborhood, same dream. John Panozzo, his twin brother Chuck, and a kid from across the street named Dennis DeYoung started playing music together on the south side of Chicago in the early 60s. John on drums, Chuck on bass, DeYoung singing and playing keys. They called themselves the Tradewinds. This wasn't a business arrangement, this was a neighborhood. They added a couple of guitarists, including James Young, locked down a record deal by '72, and had a new name, Styx. John's drumming wasn't flashy. He wasn't the guy doing 15-minute solos or landing on magazine covers. He served the music, every single time. And the music delivered. Lady in 1973 cracked the door open. Then Styx kicked it off the hinges. 4 consecutive triple platinum albums, a #1 single, anthems like Renegade and Too Much Time on My Hands that are still in rotation 50 years later. In 1979, Styx was voted the most popular rock band among American teenagers. Most bands from that era cycled through members like session players. Styx didn't. The original core held for almost 2 decades, and John was the one who never even considered leaving. This was his band. These were his guys. But the thing about being the foundation is nobody checks if the concrete is cracking until the building starts to lean. Chapter 2. The album that broke Styx wasn't a flop. It went platinum, but it left behind something nobody could fix. Kilroy Was Here came out in 1983. It was a rock opera, Dennis DeYoung's baby. It spawned Mr. Roboto, which hit #3 on the charts and split the fan base down the middle. Tommy Shaw hated it. James Young hated it. The elaborate stage show felt more like Broadway than a rock concert, and the tour turned into a civil war.
Dennis had this vision for an idea that none of the rest of us agreed with, and we battled about it for quite some time. We all finally gave in to him on this concept record of Kilroy Was Here. And he believed in it, but none of the rest of us really did. But we tried our best to make something out of what we had, and we changed management as a result of that. And it was a financial disaster. It alienated probably half our fan base.
The band fractured. Everyone scattered. DeYoung put out solo records. Shaw joined Damn Yankees. James Young stayed busy with side projects. Chuck Panozzo stepped back from music almost entirely. And John? He stayed in Chicago, stayed loyal, and started drinking. Not casually, not socially. The kind of drinking that becomes your full-time job when you don't have one anymore. But John was a drummer in a band that no longer existed. There was no solo career waiting for him. There was no plan B. A founding member of one of the biggest rock bands in America, and his income went to zero the day the bus stopped rolling. That's when the drinking got bad, and once it got bad, it never got better. But they were about to give him one more shot, and what happened next might be the cruelest part. Chapter 3. Understand what John believed in 1990. The band was coming back. He was going to play again. The nightmare was over. The remaining members, minus Shaw, got back together, plus a new guitarist, Glenn Burtnick, filling Shaw's spot. They recorded Edge of the Century at the Chicago Recording Company, and John played on it, every track. The album spawned Show Me the Way, which hit #3 during the Gulf War and became one of the band's most recognizable songs. For a minute, it actually worked. The album went gold. They toured in '91. John was back behind the kit, doing what he was built to do. But that tour wasn't a comeback. It was a window, and it was already closing. The drinking hadn't stopped. If anything, the pressure made it worse. His health was visibly deteriorating, and when the momentum from Edge of the Century stalled, A&M dropped the band. No label meant no new album. No new album meant no tour. And no tour meant John was back exactly where he'd been 6 years earlier. A drummer without a stage, a founding member without a function. Except this time it was worse, because now he'd tasted it again. He'd sat behind the kit on a real tour, played to real crowds, felt the thing he'd been missing for 6 years, and then had it yanked away a second time. The band drifted apart again, but this time, John didn't drift. He sank. And the next time Styx came calling, they wouldn't be calling for him. While John was dying in Chicago, a 26-year-old kid across town was learning his drum parts. In 1995, Tommy Shaw finally came back. The full reunion was on. Styx decided to re-record Lady for a greatest hits compilation, the launch pad for a proper comeback tour. But John was not in the studio. His liver was failing. Years of chronic alcoholism had done what years of touring never could. He was too sick to record. So Todd Sucherman got the call. 26 years old, Berkeley trained, a Chicago guy. He walked into the studio, sat behind the kit, and recorded the drum parts for Lady 95. He wasn't credited in the liner notes. To be fair, James Young was upfront about it. The offer came with a caveat. If John gets better, the gig is his. Nobody was trying to erase him. Not yet. But John didn't get better. And you're thinking, didn't anyone try to help him? They did. James Young said it years later. 3 interventions. 4. 5. They tried. But John's best friend was the thing that was killing him. And by the time the Return to Paradise tour launched in 1996, Sucherman was behind the kit. And John, the man who'd been there since before there was even a name for the band, was home in Chicago, too sick to play.
Because the guy that was handling my cartage for studio sessions in Chicago, he had worked with the band and a couple of the guys in their solo projects in the past. And in 1995, when John Panozzo was in ill health and couldn't play the drums, they wanted to get together and re-record Lady for the Greatest Hits package, because it was on a different record label. Okay. They wanted to have everything on A&M. And they called him. They said, who should we get to play? And he said, oh, call Todd Sucherman. He's doing all the sessions in town. And, he loves you guys. He grew up, he saw you guys when, he was a kid. So that was the inroads. There wasn't like a big audition or a cattle call or like I knew someone's cousin and, Sure. It was the culmination of every gig that I ever did to get to that point where I knew people who knew people.
According to Young, missing that tour was the last nail. John knew what it meant. He'd been replaced by a kid who could play his parts better than he could play them himself. And he just gave up. The tour rolled on, and back in Chicago, John was running out of time. Chapter 5. July 16th, 1996. The band was in New York, doing press for the tour. The phone rang in the tour manager's hotel room. John was found dead in his Chicago home. He was 47 years old. The Cook County medical examiner ruled the cause of death as a gastrointestinal hemorrhage. He also suffered from cirrhosis of the liver due to chronic alcoholism. Sucherman got the call that morning. The band gathered in Chuck's hotel room. Chuck, who had just lost his twin brother. The person he'd played music with his entire adult life. For 2 hours, they sat together and told stories about John. They laughed, they cried, and then they went back on the road. The remaining dates on the Return to Paradise tour were dedicated to John's memory. Tommy Shaw wrote Dear John as a tribute. It was included on the 1997 live album. And that should have been the story. A founding member, taken too soon, honored by the band he helped build. But Styx wasn't done tearing itself apart, and what came next guaranteed that nobody would be talking about John anymore. Chapter 6. John Panozzo's name was still on the contract. He'd been dead for 4 years, and now that contract was the centerpiece of a federal lawsuit. Here's the paper trail. In 1990, when Styx reunited, The members renewed a partnership agreement. DeYoung, Young, Shaw, and both Panozzos. 5 partners. Unanimity required on all major decisions. That agreement is the key to everything that happened next. John's death reduced it to 4, and when Dennis DeYoung got hit with a viral illness in 1998 that left him with extreme light sensitivity, he asked the band to wait 6 months. Shaw and Young said no. Live shows were the only revenue left. They replaced him with Lawrence Gowan and went on tour as Styx. In October 2000, DeYoung filed a federal lawsuit claiming misuse of the Styx trademark, leaning on that 1990 agreement, the one that still had John Panozzo's name on it. It settled in 2001. Shaw and Young kept the name. DeYoung got formerly of Styx, and the war of words has continued for over 25 years.
I got kicked out of the band because Babe went to #1 on the album before because I'd kind of fooled with the style a little bit. And then the record company thought that First Time was going to be another #1 record for us. They wanted to release it. And then Tommy threatened to quit the band. And then there was a big brouhaha between us, all of us. I ended up getting kicked out because I couldn't take any more. You know, you write a #1 song, have a People's Choice Award for it. You're the band of the year.
But here's what matters for this story. The lawsuit didn't just bury the hatchet. It buried John. Chapter 6. Search Styx controversy and you'll get 100 articles about DeYoung versus Young, about Mr. Roboto, about who owns the name. Search John Panozzo and you'll get a Wikipedia page and an obituary. The man who played on every album from the 1972 debut through Edge of the Century, who drove 4 consecutive triple platinum records, who never played in another band his entire life, became a single line in the story. Original drummer John Panozzo died in 1996. And you're thinking, but that's what happens to every dead musician eventually, right? The story moves on? Not like this. Because John didn't leave behind solo records. He didn't leave behind session credits, or side projects, or archival live albums with his name on the cover. His entire musical identity existed inside Styx. Every note he ever recorded professionally was a Styx note. So when the Styx story became the DeYoung versus Young story, John didn't just fade, he disappeared. Even Chuck felt it. He later said John cast a long shadow, and it wasn't until he stepped out of it that he felt comfortable being himself on stage. John didn't get erased by malice, he got erased by noise. Todd Sucherman is still the drummer of Styx. He's been in the band for 30 years now, longer than John held the chair under the Styx name. He's a phenomenal player, and he knows what he inherited. He said he adored John's work and his craft, and that all he can do is honor the legacy while adding his own stamp. Tommy Shaw wrote the tribute song. Chuck kept the memory alive at shows. James Young spoke honestly about the sadness and the interventions. Nobody in Styx pretends John didn't matter. But the public memory is a different machine. It runs on conflict, not on grief. On lawsuits, not on legacy. Every band has a guy who never makes noise, never fights for credit, never threatens to leave. He just shows up, plays the song, and trusts that being there from the beginning means something. John was that guy for 30 years. And the thing nobody tells you about being that guy is that loyalty doesn't build a legacy, it builds a silence. And silence is the easiest thing in the world to forget.